Hello and welcome to Week 10 of FINA H101 Art Appreciation. My name is Dr. Aaron Schwartz, and this is a course put on by Indiana University, Purdue University of Fort Wayne. The topic for this week is genre, which refers to a specific type of or category of painting, such as a still life, a landscape, or a portrait. We've discussed a few of these already this semester, but now we're going to look at the characteristic features of each of these more closely and consider how they're used by artists. So let's jump right into a still life scene and talk about some of these issues with that. The term convention refers to a generally agreed upon set of basic principles or procedures. For a painting to be classified as belonging to a specific genre, it must follow the conventions for that genre, at least to a certain extent. If you look closely, you'll see that in this example of the genre of still life, there are certain things that the artist included and didn't include that make it a still life, which by definition is a scene depicting inanimate objects. So take a moment and consider, how would you describe the conventions of a still life painting in general? And can you see any details in this painting that you feel do not adhere to the conventions of this genre? So as usual, pause the video if you think that's helpful and jot down a few ideas. How does this typify the genre? How is this maybe going against your expectations or the conventions of the genre? This is a painting by Pablo Picasso from 1911, and it's called The Glass. This is also an example of the genre of still life, although it's executed in a very different and abstract style compared to the Baroque work that we just looked at. How does Picasso's experimental work still follow the conventions of still life? Throughout the modern period, artists have still used still life for innovation and experimentation. And I want you to consider, again, in your notes, think about this. Why would modern abstract artists want to choose a still life genre for their experimentation? Why is the still life a good format, do you think, for experimentation? So go back to the previous one by Haberman, if you like, and really compare these two. How are they both adhering to the conventions of still life? Does one or the other break down those conventions? So think about that for a moment, and then we'll move on to the next slide. So now let's consider this piece by Thomas Cole, View of the Catskills, Early Autumn, from 1836 and 7. This is an American oil painting, and it is what we consider a landscape painting. A landscape is a scene placed in the outdoors. Now consider, what are the conventions of landscape painting? What elements are necessary and required for a painting to be classified as belonging to this genre? How does an artist indicate that the scene is outdoors? And what cannot be included in a landscape painting? So drawing upon what you see here and what you've read in your book, jot down some ideas about the conventions of landscape painting. Our next work is by the French artist Paul Cezanne, Mont Sainte-Victoire, created in about 1902 to 06. Like Thomas Cole's painting, we were looking at previously, this is an example of the genre of landscape. But as you can see, it's painted in a modern, slightly abstracted style. Like Picasso, whose still life painting we looked at just a moment ago, Cezanne was less interested here in recorded naturalistic rendition of this mountain scene than in exploring a new way to paint, a new way to represent space, volume, and color. So I want you to consider why the genre of landscape, like the still life, might be a good format for modernist experimentation. Can you recognize the conventions of landscape here? What are they, and how are they handled differently according to Cezanne's modern sensibility? So let's consider something different. This is a painting by Peter Brugel the Elder called Peasant's Dance from 1568. Now you might remember that last week we saw a painting by this artist called Wedding Feast. Here again he shows regular people, but this is an example of the genre of satire. A satirical scene is one that uses humor and exaggeration to make fun of or ridicule a person, a behavior, or a situation, especially to expose stupidity or vice, and the genre of satire is often used to challenge social or political authority. Now follow along with me as I try to describe what's going on in the scene. I can't get the animation tools to work here, so I can't circle things for you. So I'll just try to describe where in the scene you need to look. So in the scene we see a group of peasants dancing in front of a tavern. If you look towards the background, just off of the center line, to the left of the center, you'll notice a big red pennant. It's a triangular-shaped red flag hanging off of a building. That pennant marks where the tavern is. Now, taverns at this time served also as inns. You can see a man just below that red pennant. You see a man trying to pull a lady out of the inner tavern to dance with him. You also see, over to the left-hand side of the composition, a little closer in the foreground, a drunken debate across the table. There's a guy in a blue hat who almost smacks a gentleman in the face as he reaches out to make his point. And then you see small figures in the foreground towards the front of the piece on the left-hand side. Those small figures are children who are unattended by their parents, and they're dancing and imitating the adults. In the background, on the right-hand side, is a small church, and nailed to a tree on the very right-hand edge of the painting is a tiny picture of the Virgin Mary. But it seems like everyone is ignoring the religious presence in the scene. So I'd like you to take a moment to consider all of these little details. And Peter the Brugel the Elder is fantastic for putting little tiny anecdotal details in his paintings. So in your comments, I'd like you to consider why, first of all, this is not a landscape. I'd like you to consider what the artist is using satire to make a comment on. What is he satirizing here? What is he criticizing or mocking? Is it the people? Is it something else? What details has the artist intentionally included that are necessary for this to be satire? So as you do this, what you're doing is you're trying to pull out the conventions of satire within this scene. So take a moment, really look at it. There are lots of other little details that I did not mention. And see if you can figure out what he's trying to say. What is he satirizing here? This is another example of a genre scene. The female figure is just an ordinary woman reading a letter in her home. This is a picture of a regular person doing a regular activity in a regular environment. Often the setting of a genre painting, as you see here, is a domestic interior. A domestic interior is a painting simply depicting the inside of a home. Now I'd like you to consider on this piece why an artist would bother to paint such an ordinary scene. What is the purpose or value of a genre scene? What might we as the viewers be engaged by it or enjoy looking at it? Also, why is it effective to depict her inside her own home? So I'll just point out a couple of more things. This is by the artist Jan Vermeer, who's particularly well known for these genre scenes and his use of lighting. I would like you to, as much as you can, appreciate the details in the scene. They're very subtle, even though the scene looks I mean, it looks very static and it looks very still. There's no action going on here. There's not a lot of dynamic movement. There are some beautiful details and really gorgeous rendering of light in the scene that Jan Vermeer is particularly well known for. But consider this as an example of the genre of genre painting. And yes, we can use the word genre in a couple different ways there. It's a little confusing. What are these conventions, and why would an artist want to paint a genre scene? What do we, the viewer, get out of such an engagement? So far, we've looked at a few different categories of genres of painting. Still life, landscape, satirical, and genre. Now I want to come back to that point that we can use the word genre in a couple different ways. So there is a type of painting, a genre painting called genre painting. A genre scene is a scene of people going about activities of everyday life. So let's take a look at these two different paintings here. There are two genres of painting that focus on human activity. Genre painting and history painting. Sometimes it can be hard to tell the difference between the two. A history painting is a scene depicting classical history, Christian history, or mythology. Now here you see two paintings by the same artist about the same time, 1620. Now I've not put their titles up on the screen yet because I don't want you to be influenced by the titles here. Without that text, can you tell which one is a genre painting, that is a scene of everyday life, and which one of these is a history painting? Take a good look at them. One of these is a history painting. One of these is a genre. Take a moment to consider which one you think is which. I will tell you the answer, but try to figure that out first. And what clues led you to this decision? So really play this game with me. Try to figure out which one is which and why you think so. Alright, hopefully you've had a chance to make your decision. The image on the left is called Supper at Emmaus, and it's from 1620. And that is a history painting, because it shows a scene from Christian history. The image on the right is a genre painting, and it's called Merry Company, and it's from a couple years earlier, from about 1617. The biblical scene on the left is from Luke chapter 24. This shows Jesus on the day he rose from the dead, the day of resurrection. He was walking from Jerusalem to the town of Emmaus when he met some other Christian followers with whom he shared dinner. When Jesus took the bread and blessed it, the other realized that their companion was not just an ordinary traveler, but it was Jesus. Jesus, who had been crucified, was alive. They hurried to Jerusalem to proclaim the news. Now that you know the genres, can you see them differently? Can you tell which figure is Jesus? Do you think that Supper at Emmaus is supposed to look a bit like a genre scene, or that the actual genre scene is supposed to look like something more important is taking place? Remember that the genre of genre scenes is a depiction of everyday life. Is there a reason that they overlap a bit in style here? So consider that, jot down some notes, and then we'll move on. So let's consider this artwork by William Hogarth. Hogarth was a British artist. He also made satirical cartoons and was a known social critic who was concerned about the morals of modern society. He came from a poor background, and although he became a successful artist, he often criticized the wealthy. Let's take a look at this image. It is also a domestic interior, or a painting depicting the inside of a house. While it is satirical, it's making fun of the morals of the wealthy, it is best described as falling into the genre of sentimental painting. Sentimental means that there is an emphasis on the emotional atmosphere, feelings of tenderness, nostalgia, and sadness. This painting is one of a series in which Hogarth criticizes the immorality of the British upper class. In the first 5 paintings, he depicts a wealthy couple whose marriage is based on partying, cheating, debauchery, rather than love. It's much too complex to go into here, and the details aren't necessary for you to see the emotional atmosphere of the scene we're looking at. It is a really fantastic series, though. This is another one that, if you're so inclined, I'd encourage you to go do a Google image search on it and take a look at some of the other images in the series. They're a lot of fun. Basically, though, by the end of the story, the husband has died, and the woman is all alone, miserable and impoverished. Unable to cope with her place in the world, she takes a potion, and in this painting you see her collapsed into her chair dead. The old lady holds up the woman's daughter so she can give her mother one last kiss. Now, it's very hard to see here, but the daughter actually has a peg leg, and on her cheek is a black spot, which we see earlier in the series of paintings is a symptom of syphilis. So, yeah, that's going on in here. These depressing details are meant to be seen as the moral of the story. Because her parents' selfish behavior, this poor innocent child has been doomed to live the rest of her life as a crippled orphan with a horrible disease. As I mentioned, the sentiment in the painting is from the sentimental genre, tends to be very overblown and heightened. So I'd like you to consider, as you look at this painting, why the domestic interior is used here, and what are some of the conventions of sentimental painting that Hogarth pursues. What are some details, which I've mentioned or not, that make this more sentimental? So take a moment to consider those details. Now that you're an expert in recognizing different genres, take a look at this scene. What genre do you recognize this painting as, and why do you recognize it so? What conventions of the genre can you point out? What details add to the tone of the genre? So take a moment, write down your ideas on the genre of this piece. From the 1600s into much of the 1800s, there was a hierarchy or ranking of painting styles, from most important to least important. The term for this is hierarchy of genres. In the hierarchy of genres, history paintings were ranked at the top as the most important, followed by portraits, especially of royal people, then landscapes, then still life, and at the bottom were genre paintings, with the very lowest of these depicting peasant life. A landscape sometimes could be ranked more highly if it was a landscape from history or a biblical landscape. Painters creating works at the top of the hierarchy typically got paid more and were more highly thought of in society at the time. So let's consider this piece. This is by the artist Jacques-Louis David. It's entitled Intervention of the Saving Women and is from 1799. This is a history painting, the highest ranked genre of the time. Remember, a history painting is a scene depicting classical history, Christian history, or mythology. So first of all, take a moment to look at this. Comment in your notes on what it is about this painting that tells you that this is the grandest, most important type of painting at the time. Look at its details, its overall style, the actions and gestures of the figures represented, and what is taking place in the scene. Take a moment to consider some of those things, jot down some ideas about how this fits the conventions of history painting, and then we'll take a different look at it. This slide shows the painting in its current location, on display at the Louvre Museum in Paris. This narrative scene is from ancient Roman history, in which the Romans fought against a neighboring tribe called the Sabines for the privilege of marrying the beautiful Sabine women. The Sabine men were trying to prevent this, but eventually the Sabine women interceded, agreeing to marry the Romans in order to stop the battle and protect the lives of the men of their tribe. Although today any member of the public can look at it, who do you think was the original intended audience in 1799 when it was painted, and what message do you think it had to relay, that it was intending to relay? If you saw this in a museum, would you think it was more important than a genre scene of peasants drinking and dancing, and what suggests that to you? So again, jot down your ideas on what you think of in terms of audience interaction with this piece now that you see it in situ in the museum. This 1855 painting by Gustave Courbet, called The Painter's Studio, a real allegory summarizing 7 years of my life as an artist, is a mixed genre painting. By the mid-1800s, the modern sensibility was beginning to emerge, and artists were starting to challenge the rigid hierarchy of genres imposed upon them by art academies and institutions. Courbet was a leader amongst these provocateurs, and he loved to annoy the art establishment by breaking all the rules. Look closely at this painting, and try to identify which genres are represented here. How many can you find? Really try to find them and figure out which details indicate those to you. Here, you see a photograph of the painting as it's currently displayed at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, and you can see how huge the canvas had to be for Courbet to fit in all of the different genres of painting. The Musée d'Orsay houses more modern paintings than the Louvre, where the history painting of the Sabine women we just looked at is displayed. Also, fittingly, the Louvre is in the former royal palace, while the dOrsay is a renovated train station on the left bank of the Seine River, which divides Paris. The left bank is considered to be more liberal and bohemian part of the city, and the Louvre is on the right bank, the more conservative or traditional side. In the next 2 slides, we'll be talking a little bit more about how traditional versus modern paintings are displayed, and how this might affect our impression of them as viewers. Let's pretend you walked into this room of a museum. Having never seen these paintings before, does something tell you that they are the same genre? Do they look related? Can you identify what genre is represented here? Do they fit the conventions for any of the genres we've discussed so far in this lesson? Finally, how would you approach this display? Would you sit down in front of it or stand? How close would you get to the paintings? Or would you just peek in and then skip this room completely? This, by the way, is a scene from the Metropolitan Museum in New York City. Here we have a different gallery, also from the Met, but I'd like you to consider the same questions. Having never seen these paintings before, does something tell you that they are of the same genre? Do they look related? Can you tell what genre these are? How would you approach this display? Where would you sit or stand? How would you walk past them? Or again, would you just take a peek and then skip this room? We've discussed how hard it can be to distinguish between a genre painting and a history painting, and that some paintings, both in the past and today, are considered more sophisticated or more important than others. Also, sometimes we're quick to judge at first glance what genre a painting is, whether we're interested in looking at it. This painting, called Kitchen Scene with Christ in the House of Mary and Martha, is a bit of a puzzle in terms of genre, because it pictures two separate scenes of two separate genres. So first take a moment to see if you can identify which genres are represented here, and describe specifically what leads you to that conclusion. Next, let's look a little bit more closely at what's being depicted here. This painting has two stories in one. Over to the left, you see a maid at work in the foreground, but she doesn't look like she's in a very good mood. She almost looks like she's about to cry. The old woman behind her is either encouraging her or reprimanding her, and she seems to be pointing to the second scene framed in the box on the wall. This image shows Jesus visiting the sisters Mary and Martha, who learn a lesson about hosting a guest, about rushing around preparing food versus sitting down with your guest. But are we looking at this scene through a window? Is this a painting on the wall? Is there a relationship between the biblical scene and the scene of the maid at work? Nobody's really quite certain what is depicted here, and maybe the artist Velázquez wanted it to remain a puzzle. But take a moment and decide what you think of this scene. What's going on here? What do you think is the story that Velázquez is trying to indicate? So that concludes our Week 10 lecture on genre. Thank you very much for your continued participation and attention. If you have any questions or concerns about these lectures or your writing assignments or anything else, please feel free to email me. My email address can be found on the Blackboard website, and I will respond to you as soon as I can. So with that, thank you very much, and I'll talk at you next week.